Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Bianca Durrani, President and founder of Aperio Philanthropy, and it's my pleasure to welcome all of you to today's webinar about driving change in nonprofit board engagement and philanthropy. Aperio Philanthropy is a nonprofit fundraising consulting with organizations large and small across the country about kickstarting new fundraising growth that can be sustained year over year. We provide a combination of strategic advisory and hands-on support and embedded fundraisers to make fundraising simpler and more enjoyable and more effective. We are so thrilled that you are here for this conversation today. Today's webinar is co-hosted with our friends at NYU School of Professional Studies, George H. Heyman Center for Fundraising and Philanthropy, and it's my pleasure to pass the baton over to Michelle DAmico to introduce herself and the program. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you so much, Bianca. Hello, everyone. My name is Michelle DAmico, and I'm the Director of Continuing Education and Public Programs at the NYU SPS Center for Global Affairs, or CGA. Since its founding, our goal at CGA has been to prepare global citizens to make a positive impact in the world. We do this through our 2 graduate programs, one in global affairs and another MS in global security, conflict, and cybercrime. We also offer a wide variety of skills and knowledge-based continuing education courses and offer public events such as this that expand upon the topics in our classroom. As Bianca mentioned, we are also very proud to be home to the George H. Heyman Jr. Program for Philanthropy and Fundraising. Through our open enrollment courses and certificate in fundraising and new certificate in digital fundraising program, we offer professionally oriented educational options for those looking to enter or grow within the fundraising field. Courses are taught by practitioner faculty, such as your moderator for today's conversation, who bring their vast experience, expertise, and networks to the classroom. We'll send a follow-up message to all attendees, so please feel free to reach out with any questions you may have. Additionally, we have reserved some time at the end of today's conversations for questions from the audience, so please feel free to submit them via the Q&A tool. And now I'd like to turn this over to Timothy Higdon, our moderator for today's conversation. In addition to being an adjunct assistant professor here at the Heyman program, Timothy has 30+ years of experience in leadership and management in nonprofits, the military, and the private sector. Organizations he has consulted or served for include NYU's Langone Medical Center, Columbia University, Hunter College Foundation, Girl Scouts of the USA, the U.S. Holocaust Memorial Museum, Amnesty International, and many others. He's currently the president and CEO of the Hearing Health Foundation. So without further ado, I'd like to turn this over to Timothy. The floor is all yours.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Bianca. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Our topic today is driving change toward bold, community-centric fundraising. Specifically, we want to talk about board engagement. On one hand, fundraisers are really anxious to return to the former normal. That's where we can meet with donors, have in-person events, interactions with colleagues, and networking. On the other hand, our boards and our leaders are saying, you know, I really don't want to go back to the way things are, or the way things were. In crisis, we've learned more about our purpose. We've become more authentic and honest with each other and our donors. We are beginning to reckon with DEI in our organization and in our industry in new ways. And we've worked to spark change to center our communities and to carve new paths together to drive our missions forward. One area that's ripe for change is board engagement and fundraising. And I think for most of us in the sector, this is a challenge that has continued to present to us, and it's not new. I think many of us could write and fill books. What is new is the appetite for change and the openness to exploring new ways of working together. During the pandemic, board members have stepped up in new ways and have deepened their understanding of philanthropy and of our organizations. Today, the question is, how do we keep this momentum going? So let me start the conversation, first of all, by introducing our panel. Our first member is Bali Lambie-Boyer. And Bali is the Vice President of Development at Feeding Westchester, where she oversees fundraising, marketing and communications, corporate relations, community engagement, and volunteer services. That is a big portfolio. Bali is a dynamic storyteller and a brand marketer with over 20 years of experience in working with purpose-driven campaigns in some of the nation's most distinguished organizations, including Keeping America Beautiful, the American Heart Association, the American Red Cross, Sotheby's, and many others. Our second panelist is Jennifer Lee Dotson. Jennifer is a member of the board of the directors of the AFP US Foundation for Philanthropy. She is an industry leader in philanthropy with extensive experience shaping institutional fundraising at organizations such as the National Bureau of Asian Research, the National Kidney Foundation, the American Red Cross, Muscular Dystrophy Association, and Mothers Against Drunk Driving. Additionally, she's worked at the China Business Council, the American Chamber of Commerce in Hong Kong, and the US Embassy in London. And our next panelist is Laura Safran. Lauren is a managing director at Aperio Philanthropy, where she works alongside with nonprofit leaders and fundraisers to build fundraising capacity and to generate revenue for their missions. Laura has served as a frontline fundraiser and a team leader at Villanova University and at City Harvest. At City Harvest, Laura achieved transformational revenue growth in individual giving, in part due to her successful engagement of the board as philanthropic leaders. So welcome, panelists. Really happy to have you here. And I think that we have a really great panel to roll up our sleeves and tackle some of these issues. So we're going to break the discussion down into three big areas. The first is what we've experienced, what we've learned, and how we're centering our communities. So the first question I want to go to Bali. Bali, your organization's been on the front lines during the COVID response. How's your organization responded to new needs in the community, and how's your fundraising evolved?
So thank you. Let me first thank everyone for attending today. And I really want to thank our hosts for inviting me to this conversation and bringing together this group of collective voices to really discuss, bold change. And this is such a relevant time to really have this conversation. So I'm honored to be at the table with these wonderful thought leaders. So how did Feeding Westchester respond? I will say we couldn't have done it without the unwavering support of our community partners and our leaders, and with the generosity and empathy of our community. I mean, our community just really stepped up, because the pandemic impacted the way many people went about their daily lives. Many were left without work, so the need for food became a difficult choice for many. Prior to COVID, our network of nearly 300 community partners and programs, we had been serving about 125,000 to about 150,000 individuals each month. And then during the height of the pandemic, that number doubled, serving upwards of 225,000 people each month. And currently, unfortunately, we are still serving on average about 200,000 children, seniors, and working families each month. And so with that increase also, came at a time where both socially and politically, our landscapes were changing. So fundraising, in my mind, really changed organically over the last 18 months. We saw digital transformation brought about supporters closer to the cause, giving them instant access to react emotionally and empathetically based on what was coming across their news feeds, and making the experience simple and engaging for them. Donors were giving more than one gift because they felt compelled to really try and help the community as best as they could, even though they may have been facing difficult times. Corporations and foundations provided flexibility, which was amazing to grantees, right? And reallocating funds to fundraising relief efforts. And our board members, they were amazing. They stepped up where we needed them to step up. They were flexible, they were agile in providing support, and many of them became very intimate in the well-being of our staff because we fortunately had to be at the front lines. And so most of our teams were on site when other colleagues were able to work from home. And we saw our board really embrace that. They also became much more community-centric and I think closer to the mission. And the thing that I think is the most important to recognize is I think that this time helped empower fundraisers, right? It allowed fundraisers to really lean into their purpose, giving them greater ease to making larger asks, right? Because the need was there. We understood really what our job was, what our purpose was. And so fundraising, I think, has evolved in some really exciting ways over the last 18 months. And part of that is meeting people where they were.
Great. Thanks, Bali. Jennifer, question for you. At the AFP, you're meeting nonprofit leaders and fundraisers of all types from around the country and around the world. Your experience over the last year, how are you seeing the profession changing? Is there a trajectory shift that's happening as well? Or is this, is this going to, do you feel like this is just going to be temporary until we go back to art, until we're post-pandemic? So what's your take on that?
Timothy, you asked such a great question, and I think you asked me the hardest one too. But let me start by echoing Bali and saying thank you to you and to all of the participants today for joining us for this conversation. A year ago, my goodness, didn't it seem like forever, but just yesterday? So thinking back to just 1 year ago as a fundraiser, and serving alongside all the fundraisers that I get to interact with at AFP, we were all just sort of getting over the hump of what is the pandemic doing to our profession? How is it changing our ask? How is it affecting what we're doing with events and pivoting to virtual, a virtual environment? So everything that Bali said, plus more. It was the time that we were all thinking about our year-end appeals. It was a time that we were all planning our Giving Tuesday programs. It was a time where we were thinking about what we were going to do for our holiday ask. And it does seem like just 1 year ago, I was very new to this concept of community-centric fundraising. I had only heard of it for the first time from my colleagues at AFP, not just a few months before I moved from Hawaii to Washington. And I was brand new to a new job, a new market, and grappling again with the pandemic. So everything was new to me and still having to meet year-end goals 1 year ago. And I think it was just chaos. But what happened was with the profession as fundraisers, what I love about being a fundraiser is how we do support each other. And I was able to turn to other colleagues at different organizations at different times throughout different parts of the United States and also internationally, and ask folks, what were they doing? Because the best practices that we had, the book of fundraising was being rewritten as we were doing this work just 1 year ago. And I feel like that's continuing today. But even more so, I really was grateful to fundraisers, colleagues, board members who were able to wrestle with the idea of community-centric fundraising with me in a very safe space and support each other. Because I think for me, I was educated in fundraising in a more donor-centric methodology. And so learning about community-centric fundraising, I didn't want to look like I was ignorant about it. I didn't want to seem like I didn't know what to do or say about community-centric fundraising. And so fundraisers in this profession, in AFP, were able to help me lean in and provide me with training, provide me with knowledge. And it was it was something that I still look back 1 year ago, I'm so grateful for, and I continue to be grateful for it. It is the best profession in the world. And I am just grateful to be here. And I'm grateful to all the fundraisers that have helped and continue to help and mentor in that way. So 1 year ago, Timothy, a lot has changed, and it still continues to change in as we speak. So thank you for that wonderful question. It makes me very reflective of everything that has happened.
So Jennifer, I want to do a follow-up question if I could. You've spoken a lot around the profession, but thinking about board engagement, how's that changed during the crisis? And especially in the shifting environment of social justice, what are you seeing what's happening with boards across I mean, you have a wonderful bird's eye view of many organizations. What do you think's happening?
Oh, that's so great. You just reminded me of something that did happen just a year ago. And we had board members come on to our organizations that had never met each other before, right? And so we were operating in this virtual space. And so again, everything that we normally practice with board candidacy and board nominations, and then onboarding new members to our organization completely went out the window again, because when you are on a board, you really need that trust, the relationship, and you really need to be able to know that when you are making decisions, when you're governing, when you have these fiduciary responsibilities for an organization, that you can lean on and trust your colleagues on the board. And so what we saw just 1 year ago, there were folks that were coming on as board members that had never met each other. And how do you build that trust? How do you build that relationship in a virtual setting without having what I would say, the usual interactions where you're in the trenches, you're making decisions, you're shoulder to shoulder, literally shoulder to shoulder with someone around a board table. And you're having to sort of replicate that in a digital environment. It was very difficult. And I say we are, even 1 year on from that, still struggling with that. So board members who have come on 1 year ago need a different way for us to engage with. And what is that? What are the tips? What are the tricks? What is the advice that we have for folks that are new to our boards, that are having to make the ask, that are having to help the fundraisers with the fundraising work and speaking as ambassadors on behalf of our organization? How do we do that? And it's been hard, but again, I think we have enough collegiality amongst this group and amongst our colleagues at the AFP that we were able to sort of share what do you do and how do you solve that problem. So again, another great question, and I did see some struggle in that respect.
Thanks, Jennifer. Laura, I want to get to you. Got a couple questions for you, but I mean, you've had the perspective of both being a consultant and being in organizations, so you've had both the inside and the outside view. Mm-hmm. What I'd love to know is, what's your opinion of what's good board leadership? What does it look like? You know, how as a consultant, when you're doing an assessment, how do you say, hey, there's good leadership here in philanthropy, or there is opportunity for growth?
Sure. And thank you to my fellow panelists, and thank you to Timothy. I'm really pleased to be here again with the unique perspective of having been at a nonprofit, been in a leadership role there, partnering with the board on philanthropy, and now really working with many, many clients across the country on this issue. So I'd say, as it relates to philanthropy, Timothy, boards, when I say, oh, this is a good board, this is a board that's set up for success, is everyone knows their role. And that's from the staff level to all the members on the board. Board members have really clear expectations, and there's a real partnership between the staff and board as it relates to the philanthropy program. Tactically, it means that they have requirements. There's a formal role in philanthropy that's agreed upon The executive team and board members know how they should be spending their time, and staff members as well. It's someone's or many people's specific role to support the board members' role in philanthropy. They're volunteers, and even with small, lean staff, it's really important that staff members understand what their role is to get the most out of the board members' time. Excuse me. Board members are amazing advocates, we know that, but they really can be great fundraisers. But that doesn't mean that they have to ask for money, right? So again, the roles and responsibilities of how the board works with the staff, when they're opening a door as opposed to actually just making an introduction or being part of a solicitation is really important. I think most important for folks that are looking to start or reset their board is really ensure you have an overall plan of how to communicate with the board generally, especially as we're coming out of crisis, but what is that cadence of communication? And then when it comes to fundraising specifically, you really need to make sure that we're communicating clearly with the board and what you want them to focus on, right? So that's part of their annual goals and their annual requirements, but also specifically day by day, week by week, when you need their help, don't ask the whole board for help. Ask one specific person. Ask the person that is going to be most valuable to you, whether it's that donor relationship, that strategy session, whatever it is. Most important, I think, is to know your board members, get to know them personally, and engage them in a way that makes sense for them. They are often your top donors, but might not be treated that way. If they're not your top donors, they're giving a ton of time and passion to your organization. Get to know them, get to find out why they've become involved with your organization, and with them in partnership, create a plan for how they can support your philanthropy program, right? There's going to be those requirements for the board at large, but each board member is an individual. They're a unique unicorn, and they need to be treated as such, and you need to create a plan that works for them. Finally, I'll say you want to be alert to board members who want to help, but want to do something new and different and create more work. Again, communication is key here. Be really clear with priorities. It's okay to say no to board members. That is, you are allowed to do that. Again, share what your fundraising priorities are and what your focus and strategies are for that month, quarter, year, 5-year plan, and what that reasonable amount of work comes with that. And again, I think communication is key with board members.
Laura, I think you hit on a really, on that communication's key. I often tell the folks that I work with is that bad news is not like fine wine. It doesn't get better with time. And so it is important that if you have because things change so rapidly in this environment, that, communicate often with your board, be very candid with them, because the last thing you want to have happen is they hear about it when it's beyond when something can be done. So I think you're spot on there. But Laura, I want to ask you a follow-on question if I can.
Please.
You're talking about you're implying, I think, about the board culture and getting to know the board. Board diversity is becoming an increasingly hot topic in our sector. And, there's growing concern, or at least discussion, that some of our boards don't represent the communities that they serve. So from your perspective, I'm curious what you're thinking on diversifying boards. How urgent is that? How important is it?
It is urgent and important, Timothy. And, we see ample studies have shown that diverse teams, including boards, perform better, right? We know that. That's what the research says. And diversity in this sense doesn't just mean racial diversity. It means diversity of background and experiences, gender identity, and all of that. But we know that boards composed of individuals with a variety of skills and perspectives, backgrounds, and resources, they're going to promote more creativity. They're going to promote more innovation, and they yield differing voices that can play an important role in accomplishing the organization's mission. It's also making sure that you have the increased understanding of your constituents and your community needs. We've seen for far too many nonprofits, there's a real disconnect between what the board looks like and what the people being served looks like. And that disconnect makes it very difficult for the board and ultimately the organization to meet the real needs of the community. When your board is involved in decision-making and strategic planning and program development, how do you know what your purpose, vision, mission should be if the leaders are really not embedded in the community that you're serving? And then finally, I think you can more authentically make partnerships when you have a diverse board, right? Diverse boards are more likely to attract diverse donors, and grant makers are increasingly focused on diversity. So I think there's a few different reasons that it is urgent and important.
The
Thanks.
other thing, if I could just add to the diversity, is also looking at boards who can have shared life experience, right? That we also look at that as a value and diversity on our board as well.
Great. So Bali, I want to let me continue on that thread of thought, if I could. When as we're talking about diverse, diverse opinions, diverse life experiences, and we also talk about embracing community-centric fundraising. So how do you tie all this together? So give us your thoughts on how you tie it together, especially if your board isn't exactly where you want it to be as far as diversity goes. So what's your thoughts on that?
So love the question. It's a bold question, but these are bold conversations and bold times. I think, one of the things that, so I'm hesitant. So let me be transparent, right? To me, there is no easy one answer fits all, right? This can be a difficult situation for many to have these conversations with your board, especially if you are someone who's in a position where you get hired and fired by your board. And we all know that community-centric, the model and the movement is really based in equity and social justice, right? Two words that become or can be difficult for a lot of people to have conversation around. And so I think one of the things to say, and Laura touched on this a little bit, is having these bold conversations, right? Being able to have a level of bold and difficult conversations is needed, because we need to be able to walk alongside our board, right? And make sure that we are not only are they our advocates, but that we are their advocates as well. And so if we don't set expectations, right, we're not setting up our relationship to be a successful one. And so I think some of the things that you have to do, again, right, you have to assess your comfort level, right? The comfort level of your organization, right? What's that bravery level of the organization? I think you also have to determine what is right? What's your definition of right? Because we all have different definitions. And then I think you have to look at what is the need for equity and social justice, and how does that play in moving your mission forward, right? What role does that have? And then I think you also have to look inside yourself and say, how does this align with my soul, right? And I think once you can assess those two things, I think things that you can do is develop a committee, right, of mission advocates who are focused on the model, and they can be members of your community who are not your board. So I think you really have to, to Laura's point, really be clear about those expectations and be comfortable with where you're sitting in that conversation, and then be bold enough to have those conversations.
Got it. And Bali, one other thing that I think that maybe to add to this is that this is a journey for organizations. There's not a final destination. It's not, I tick the box, I've got it is a journey. And I think that, when you mention bold conversations, sometimes the first bold conversation is just, where are we at? What do we look like? What's our commitment? And even having that, and just to start the conversation, can be so empowering for organizations. So thank you for those thoughts. Jennifer, I want to segue, and I want to keep this theme going, but I want to take it back up a little bit more macro and say, in your opinion, again, you've had this bird's eye view, what's an ideal board look like? Talk about kind of its size and composition, and so give us your thoughts on what's an ideal board.
Right. Well, I wanted to share with everyone something I learned from my colleague Bali, is to think courageously. She makes that her motto, and I've just really learned from her how to think courageously about this exact topic. So you asked Laura, is it urgent? Is it important? And I agree, it is urgent. It is important to have that diversity. So what does an ideal board look like, Timothy? of course, our ideal board is a board that has 100% participation in the board campaign, right? I mean, like, who wouldn't want that? An ideal board is one that is courageous about being an ambassador for our organization. An ideal board is one that represents every aspect of our community, because we want to be community centric. We want to have the diversity in thought. But let's just be honest, we don't have ideal boards, and boards are always a work in progress, but they are our greatest asset. I think what I tend to lean on is every organization has their own bylaws. And so as we work to have those ideal boards where we have representation, where we have diversity, where we have the young and the old and the small corporations and the small businesses and the large corporations and the large businesses, individual philanthropists, all represented on our board, we have to still follow our bylaws, and the timing of our bylaws doesn't necessarily lend itself a lot of times to what we want in terms of change now, change that is urgent, change that must happen as soon as possible. So I've seen, at least in my work, a nominating process that takes longer than I would want as a fundraiser. And that's so frustrating sometimes. And with the nominating process, sometimes we lose ideal board candidates because it's slower than we would want, or slower than the board candidate would want. But we still have to be so careful that we are following our bylaws, that we're following the process and the procedure that are still fundamental to all of our nonprofits. So in some respects, in some instances, I've heard from colleagues that they've taken this opportunity to overhaul their strategic plan in order to make sure that it meshes, that it comes more in center with where they want to be with their process and the procedures. And so it's still something that I think I'm grappling with as a fundraiser. What does an ideal board look like? It is the diversity, it's the voices, it's the representation, it is members that are passionate about the mission and are willing to partner with me as a fundraiser to make those asks and meet those fundraising goals. So that matrix, and I have that matrix, I plot it out, and I want to make sure that my board has a representation on all 4 quadrants of my matrix. And so I think everybody has a tool like that they have internally. And so meeting those needs is really what we are continuing to do.
Jennifer, I think you bring up a couple really great points. And one is managing the expectation of both the board and the candidate during the recruitment process. I like to use the analogy that bringing on a board member is like getting married. You can make it you can get married really fast, and it's really hard to get out of a marriage if it's bad. And so it's one of those things that you want to be deliberate, but manage the expectation with the prospective board member that says, we want to go through this process where you feel that that you have an understanding of who we are and what we're doing, so that we can all make the right and informed decision. I think you touched on one other really key point, and that is about the equity and inclusion. This is not just about having the right number of, you name it, on your board, but is this an environment where people can show up in their true and authentic self and their full self-expression and absolutely advance the work? One of the things that could be disastrous for an organization is to really focus on, we need so many BIPOC people on our board, and you bring them on, but then there's not structure and the culture does not allow their voices. And so you have a churn of those folks that are going on and off the board, and that can be very damaging as well. So I think that you touched on some really great points about managing expectations, bringing people on, which is really spot on.
So true, so true. Thank you, Timothy, for that great summary.
Yeah, so I want to ask the other panelists before we shift. Anybody else have thoughts about ideal boards around the recruitment process? I know that many boards are in transition now, so I'm just curious with our other panelists before we shift to our to the Q&A. Any other thoughts on ideal structure? And the other question I throw out to everybody: what's the ideal size number to have on your board? Bali, you want to take a?
So I don't know if I know the ideal number. I know that it shouldn't be too large, right? And so, but I don't have what that
Like Goldilocks.
Yeah, right. I don't know what that sweet spot is yet. In 20 years, I don't know if I have the answer to that. I think the true answer is more about what's that old saying? It's the quality over quantity. I think that's really what probably is the best way to put it. I think, but the thing that, to answer your first question, I cannot stress enough how important it is to upfront have clear conversations about expectations. I think in the past, when I was a young person in this industry, I think we were intimidated, right, to talk honestly, right? Because we wanted this CEO of X company and we knew all these things we thought he or she could do. And so we were like, yes, and let's bring them on because they're a great name to have on the website. But we didn't set clear expectations. And so we had this great name of influence and affluence, but we weren't able to leverage it. And so I literally can't stress enough. I know it's not easy because you may lose a board member, right? You may lose that popular name because you set these expectations. But in the end, the reward is so much better because it takes just as much effort to manage a non-functioning board member as it does to manage a functioning board member. So where do we want to set our resources, right? We prefer to do it with someone who's going to be an advocate with us, someone who's going to be a partner with us, and someone who really wants to be a champion of our mission. So I cannot stress that point enough. I know both Jennifer and Laura brought it up, but that to me is the most important thing over size.
Got it. That is very sage wisdom. And, like I kind of said, it feels like Goldilocks, not too small, not too big, just right. And that really is going to depend on the organization and where they're at in their life cycle, whether you need a working board or you need a philanthropic board, or really what the needs of the organization are. But Laura, I want to tap into you and just ask you the same question. What's your feeling on board composition? Any thoughts on recruiting strategies that you've seen to be effective for boards?
The composition and recruiting strategy, I think what we've been talking about is really important to set the goals and strategies, right? What do you as the organization need? Where are your holes and where do you need support? Whether that's the variety of skills or perspectives, backgrounds, resources, right? Depending where you are, as you said, Timothy, in your life cycle as an organization, you're going to have different needs and those needs will evolve. So it's really important that that's a regular part of your work that you're looking at is what are we, whether you're in a strategic plan or not, where are we going and what are our needs? What support do we need from a board member? And then the recruitment strategies to support that, right? So it's really important that you have people on the board that are focused on that. Again, talk about roles and responsibilities, whether you have a formal governance chair or someone who's going to volunteer time, but people, back to what I said at the top of the hour, the board members need to know what they're doing. So having a board member 2, 5, 10, depending on the size of your board, that are focused on recruitment. And again, you have that regular, clear communication with the staff lead on that is really important. But most important recruitment strategy is having recruitment goals, right? Understanding who you need on the board that will best support your organization at that time. I really want to second Bali's point about expectations is critical. That is the make or break it for success of a board member coming on to the board of directors. If they understand what they are going to be asked of daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and annually, and you keep to that, great experience. And as Bali said, just as much time, often more work to manage the board members who aren't keeping up with expectations, so that And that does slow down the recruitment process a bit, right? And it might mean, as we've said, you might lose people because they're not signing up for that. But having other outlets, could they become a donor? Can they become a volunteer in a different way? It doesn't mean that you're losing them as a part of your organization, but it doesn't mean that they're going to be in this premier role as a board member. So again, I saw some questions coming in about give get. It's everything. It's how much, what's their financial responsibility, what's the time responsibility. I've seen organizations even have to bring 2 more board member recommendations, right? You can get very, very specific with your requirements, but you have to have them. You have to have those expectations. And again, it can be scary the first time, but it makes the conversations a lot easier on your side as the fundraiser or nonprofit leader, and for the potential board member, you're setting each other up for success by having those expectations up front.
Thanks, Laura. I think that, you all bring up indirectly a very good point, and that's having a board job description. And you actually can negotiate that with a potential board member where they may say, I can't do this. And, and so you can have a negotiation around it. And then you have an agreement on what's the expectation, because having agreed upon expectations is so important. I want to shift into our audience Q&A because I want to make sure that we have time to have our questions answered. The first question is, how do you engage a board to be more philanthropic? Specifically, we would like to achieve 100% board giving. Is it appropriate to set expectations with your board that they will be asked for a gift or a donation? Bali, I'm going to throw that one to you.
Bring it on. So yes, I personally think that the role of the board is twofold. A board member should be expected to give financially to the mission, right? Because that supports the sustainability and the vitality of the mission. I also think they should support from a volunteer standpoint, whether that's with their wisdom, their skill, or their time, right? And so that is, yes, important. I apologize. What I will say about the give or get is that I would suggest talking about mission, right? And selling the mission. Worry less about the fact that you're trying to get 100% board giving, and talk about you're trying to inspire 100% of all advocates, right, who signed on to help push this mission forward to support the sustainability of this organization. Because you can get 100%, right, and everyone gives a $5, right? What you want to do is inspire everyone so that they authentically want to give, right? And I think when you talk more about mission, it's hard to argue, right? That's less. What are you going to argue? I need to help be able to provide food for those who are in need. How are you going to argue that with me, right? And so I think mission selling is so much more important when you're having those conversations with your board.
Jennifer, what do you think about having 100% board participation?
Oh, I'm all for 100% participation, but I've been part of 3 organizations where I was hired as a fundraiser that did not already have 100% board participation. So I love this question from the attendee, because I can think of those 3 instances and how difficult it was to have the conversations with board members to say, well, I know before you were brought onto this board and you had conversations as a board member coming to this organization that was different than the one that I'm going to have with you now. And the conversation I'm going to have with you now is specific to 100% participation on our board giving campaign. I actually have 2 organizations that did not have a board giving campaign before I started as a fundraiser. And so creating that process was new and was challenging and was difficult for those board members to hear. So 100% board participation, it has to happen. It has to happen. And guess what? Every organization out there is working towards that. So when you bring that conversation to the table, it's not like, what are you going on about? And so it's really about, this is a conversation that is not new, but how to achieve it. I have personally fallen back onto a very simple piece of paper that I received from a mentor of mine. And she said, copy and paste this. This is a board agreement. This is a template for a board agreement. It's one sheet of paper. You put your name on it, and you have on there stated that there is an expectation that you will be asked for a contribution to this organization, and you will also ask on behalf of contributions to this organization. But setting that expectation, just like Laura said, just like Bali said, setting those expectations up front. And when it's typed up onto a single piece of paper with your name, signature, on date on it, it's clear, but it helps facilitate, again, that relationship building. So it's not like, hey, Timothy, can you just sign this piece of paper? And it's done. It's like, here's an agreement that I would love to have a conversation with you about. What does 100% participation look like to you? Why do you think it matters to you? And I am so grateful for my experiences in different organizations, whether it was Red Cross, whether it was Mothers Against Drunk Driving, whether it was the National Kidney Foundation. Those board members became friends because you have to have these hard conversations about money. And when you do, you get to the heart of it, you get to the mission, and you get to build friends as well as working towards a common goal. And there's nothing better than that. So yes, it's hard, 100% participation. I've also used another tactic where it's not just the fundraiser driving the board campaign; it's a peer-to-peer process. So you work with a board member. So Laura and Bali both mentioned choosing that board member that will be your partner is so important, and identifying that person to be the lead for the board campaign makes it a peer-to-peer ask, and your success rate just goes much higher, increases. So lots of tips and tricks out there. I think what we're struggling with and what we're grappling with now, Timothy, is how to do it in a digital world, right? When you're in that boardroom and you're looking around and you're shaking the hand, and say, Timothy, do I have your agreement for 100% participate? Little different when it's like on a Zoom meeting and saying, Laura, I'm going to turn off my video now. So yeah.
The other thing to add to that too is to communicate why it's important, right? So there's the mission piece, but then there's also the filing and status piece, right? There's the application pieces when it comes to foundations. And so, providing that additional education, I think, is also valuable to share with the board.
I think that's a really important piece, Bali, and I've also the other why that has resonated with boards I've worked with both on the ground and as a consultant is it is much more meaningful as a board member when you are asking on behalf of an organization to say, join me as a donor, than to say, please give to that organization that I haven't given to. And especially at the transformational level or even the major level of donors, the first thing a donor is going to say to a board member is, great, what did you do for the organization? I'll consider a gift, but what have you done personally? And that join me message is much stronger than, again, just please, would you make a gift to that organization? And I think the last piece I want to make on 100% participation, the last point I would like to make on 100% participation is, yes, as my fellow panelists said, it's important, but it's the starting point. As we're getting to, the more meaningful and the meatier work that you'll do with your board member is that personal one-on-one discussion about their philanthropy. So you'll get to, after the first year of implementing 100% participation, you just need to get everyone in for lots of reasons. The second and third year can really be about, what do you want to accomplish with your philanthropy? Why are you here? As Bali and Jennifer are talking about, what brought you to the board in the first place, and how can your philanthropy support that, your involvement at large? And I think that's where it becomes less scary, and it really becomes a partnership with these board members, because you're not just going to get participation dollars, you're going to get real transformational dollars from your board members that way.
And Laura and Bali, I think you both touch on something that's really important. It's about the relationship and cultivating the relationship. It's where I am always really reluctant to have a give or get for a board member, because you may have a board member. So if you say, and this is just for example, that you have to give $5,000 to be on the board. Well, somebody who may not be able to do that, but has other skills and things that bring you to the board, may drop off the board. And then you may have somebody who can make a 6 or 7 figure gift, but the ask is for 5,000. So you leave money on the table. So this is really engaging people at their philanthropic capacity and for their attachment to the organization. We have time for one last question. So this is, I think, is a really great question. Can you tell me a story or two, well, let's stick with one story, about how the synergy between board and staff has worked in securing or playing out an effective fundraising? So the partnership between board and staff in securing funds. So I'm gonna ask Bali, because you're in a organization now, and I guess to rephrase that, how has board being participating with staff really helped advance fundraising?
So in my experience, when board walks alongside staff partners, it always yields higher results, right? Because we're leveraging both their influence and affluence, and we're also leveraging their collective skills and influence and affluence of the board. So for me, when you can communicate that and find a champion who is willing to do that, that is the best result. What I have and sometimes encourage folks to do, depending upon the board member, is to have, kind of to Laura's point, that open dialogue, right? And sometimes coming with, who is your ideal prospect, right? What is that profile of that ideal prospect, to help get the board member thinking about who in their network are they comfortable and who fits that profile, right? I think sometimes what we leave on the table is not being clear about the profile of the prospect we're looking for, right? Because there's a difference between different people that we can bring on, right? And so if we're looking for someone who's going to be focused in the major gift area, if we're looking for someone who can support like a walk, right? Those are different profiles. So I think making sure that you're having that conversation, because what you want to do is meet that board member where they are, right? You want to elevate their abilities. And so if you set them up for failure, right, then they're just going to shy away from. And I think also communicating that their best value is the introduction. They don't have to make the ask, but that introduction, I'm going to take a call from someone who's been introduced to me by a friend or a colleague quicker than I'm going to take a cold call. And so that value, letting them know that we'll take that away from them, right? That stress away, but make that introduction, because that is priceless.
And Bali, I think that's great. And often that's the best place that I've seen with board traction, is being able to do introductions and open doors, and not depending on the board to do the ask, because people are afraid to ask for money and they freak out about it and say, I can handle building the relationship. It's opening the door. So ladies.
And I would add that not only do sometimes board members are fearful of it, they're often not the best person to make that ask. And I want to be clear about that if you have a professionalized fundraising staff or executive director or CEO, and there are folks on staff that are being paid to do this and do it well, they're often going to make a much stronger case to a donor than the board member will. But again, their introduction is critical and often the only in to those donors. So I agree with everything Bali and Timothy said, and I'd say a story about how it's been done probably is really, again, relationship-based fundraising, working with those board members individually. I've seen one of the organizations I work for, we created a quarterly prospect list of here's the top 5 individuals, the top 5 corporate, and the top 5 foundations that we are looking for introductions to. We refresh that quarterly. In addition, once or twice a year, we met with each board member and said, here are folks that you've either brought to an event or we think you might know through our research. And in addition to giving that general list, give board members a specific list. Often, they may or may not know them. more often than not, it prompts something in their brain to say, oh, I don't know that person, but it reminds me of someone else that has that profile, as Bali's saying, and it reminds me of this other person who I can make an introduction to. But again, that's done one-on-one. So that would be a case study that I would highly recommend people test out. Is yes, have your hot list of we need introductions, but also spend the resources internally when you can to make those targeted lists for board members. They really reap much higher benefits.
Thank you, Laura. Before we send the case off to the jury, I want to give each of our attorneys an opportunity to make closing arguments. So what I'm going to ask everyone to do is very briefly, just in a few sentences, any last parting guidance, wisdom, advice that you want to give to our participants. So Jennifer, I'll start with you.
Great. I, Jennifer Lee Dotson, state to the audience, well, I think this is something that we all have grappled with for so long, and board engagement is something that has not gone away. In fact, becomes even more exciting every time we talk about it. So I'm going to say to everyone here that fundraisers and fundraising is a profession that really is a group that leans in and supports each other. And I really am grateful for that. So reach out to me, to any of the panelists, and let's continue the conversation because it has never stopped, right? We could pick up board engagement today, tomorrow, yesterday, a week from now, and we're still learning together. So in this environment, I think it's even more important that we all lean in together, that we all come together and we figure this out, because board engagement right here, right now, as we're coming up on year end and our holiday giving and our asks for our fundraising goals, we're in it and we're in the thick of it. So I welcome any questions from any of you. I look forward to connecting and I look forward to having more conversation. Timothy, thank you so much for leading our conversation. And board engagement, it's our greatest strength, it's our greatest joy, but also can be our greatest sense of change. So let's change this world together. And I look forward to that.
Thanks, Jennifer. Bali, if you have a last minute parting thought, that would be awesome.
So the last, what I would leave everyone with is words from a wonderful civil rights leader, John Lewis. And his quote is, never be afraid to make some noise and get into good trouble, necessary trouble. So I encourage everyone to have bold and courageous conversations.
Thanks, Bali, really appreciate that. And Laura, you get the last word before I do, of course, but.
I was going to use the word bold, Bali, so I'll leave that one with you, but I'd say don't be shy, don't be fearful. Your board members are your partners, but you have to be clear with them. So again, have those conversations, be open and honest with them. And again, set expectations, set roles and responsibilities, and hold everyone accountable.
Great. I want to thank each of you, Jennifer, Bali, and Laura, for being such great panelists today, and for all of you for joining us on our session today. Michelle will be following up with a recording of today's events for your future reference. And we look forward to having you join us in 2022 for other events at NYU and Aparo. Thank you again for joining us. Hope you have a great week and best of luck with your fundraising efforts as you move boldly into the end of the year. Thanks again. Have a great day.